Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare.
During the Apollo 8 flight, astronaut Commander Frank Borman came down with a stomach bug and ended up vomiting and shitting himself at the same time. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. What's the most bizarre historical fact you know?
Number 1.
Commenter. The youngest person to ever give birth was a 5-year-old girl. Her name is Lena Marcela Medina de Jurado and she is still alive today. Person B. Her son died in his 40s, so she actually outlived the child she gave birth to. To make matters worse, her father is suspected to have fathered the child. That was a confusing and creepy sentence to write. Person C. I watched a documentary on her and it was suspected incest. Also, she was able to get pregnant by a unique disorder that caused her to menstruate early.
Number 2.
Jeffrey Epstein used his money to do 18 months in jail and had 6 days a week work release. He also sexually trafficked well over 30 women and sexually abused over 100 minors, some multiple times, and evaded real justice for over 20 years. When he was finally thrown in a real jail, he died of apparent suicide, 2 days before that left 100% of his money to his brother. He had dirt on everyone and recorded everything his guests did to these young girls. His hanging in jail was ruled suicide, yet on second coroner review he had 3 broken bones in his jaw/neck area. The coroner doesn't believe he could have gotten these from a suicide. Also, the guards were asleep that night, cameras did not work, one of the guards had not worked in that area before. His victims never got real justice and all the wealthy and powerful people he was blackmailing breathed a sigh of relief that he cannot turn over evidence against them as part of a plea deal.
Number 3.
During World War I, a German armed merchant cruiser called SMS Cap Trafalgar disguised herself as a British converted ocean liner, RMS Carmania, to infiltrate and sink British supply convoys. But not long after leaving port she ran into the actual RMS Carmania, who sunk her after a battle lasting several hours, though Carmania was only barely still afloat herself. There's also accounts that state Carmania was coincidentally disguised as Cap Trafalgar at the same time, but that's unsubstantiated and likely made up to make the story even more bizarre.
Number 4.
Commenter. Ancient Greek tragedian Aeschylus, ca. 450 BCE, received a prophecy that he would die by something falling on his head. He spent the rest of his life outside in open fields, where a passing bird dropped a turtle on his head and killed him. Person B. What's best is that he received the prophecy at a young age, and living in constant fear for his life was likely what drove him to become such a prolific poet that he was coined as the father of the Greek tragedy.
Number 5.
Commenter. A German soldier deserted his company right before World War II ended. He found an officer uniform and instead of using it to escape, he used it to order a massacre of other German deserters at a detention camp. Person B. Sort of reminds me of the Utah POW camp massacre. In 1945, an American soldier, Clarence V. Bertucci, serving as a guard at a POW camp in Utah, went out drinking. After sobering up, he climbed the guard tower, loaded a M1917. 30 calories machine gun and unloaded 250 rounds into the German POW's tents. He killed 9 and wounded scores more. He was placed in a mental hospital and the killed German POWs were buried with full military honors. Person C. Another crazy fact about this guy. He was released by mistake and returned to his life as a chimney sweep. In 1946, the Royal Navy caught him, he was tried, found guilty of war crimes and executed by guillotine. Person D. I think the Germans and Russians treated each other's POWs as subhuman. Person E. Yes, the goal of Operation Barbarossa and General Plan OST were to ethnically cleanse Eastern Europe of Slavic peoples and the Jews. Although I don't think the Soviets thought of Germans as subhuman, more so it was payback to the large-scale slaughter that the Nazis were committing. Person F. I feel ashamed, but every day I swear I learn some new absolutely disheartening fact about World War II. I was just looking into the movie Man Behind the Sun, which is about Unit 731 in Japan that arguably did worse human experimentation than the Nazis. Person H. I didn't know about the World War II ethnic cleansing of the Slavic people until college, and that's telling since I went through a pretty decent school system. Also, another fun fact is that the Americans and the Japanese both depicted each other as inhuman monsters. There were cases of Japanese troops being mutilated by American troops and having their skulls and other body parts be used as trophies. Didn't really help that the Japanese used that to instill the fear in their population that the Americans were coming to butcher them all. Google suicide cliff. Person G. Yeah, Unit 731, those are the kinds of stories that you wish you could forget about. The experiments being conducted by both the Nazis and the Japanese were just so deliberately sadistic. I've been traveling/living with Roma communities around Europe for several years, as an anthropologist, and I have both read and personally listened to some of the older generation's experiences during World War II, including the Nazi experiments on Roma children. It's just unimaginable, and it still manages to shock me sometimes. I think it's hard for us to really contemplate the horrors that people all over the world were enduring back then, and unfortunately much of it has already been forgotten or erased.
Number 6.
In 1767, when British Captain Samuel Wallis journeyed to Tahiti to trade, his crew found that the natives would exchange iron for sex. As a result, the crew began prying iron nails and fittings from anything they could find, to the point Wallis had to end the trip early because the crew had begun to remove the nails from the deck boards and beams, literally taking the ship apart in harbor.
Number 7.
Commenter. Empress Josephine used to perform a sexual act known as a zigzag on Napoleon, and historians aren't quite sure exactly what it was that she did to him. Person B. Here's an interesting excerpt. 6 years younger than she and far greener in the bedroom, he was baffled and excited by her repertoire of techniques, especially a set of moves he called her zigzags, a term that may for contemporary readers recall Jerry Seinfeld's swirl. In Steamy Billet Stew, the general praised his darling's little black forest. I kiss it 1,000 times and wait impatiently for the moment I will be in it. To live within Josephine is to live in the Elysian fields. He also dreamed of being her shoes and her gown. Ambition and desire, the dangerous life of Josephine Bonaparte. Person C. According to my historical references, it's something involving a pig and le glacé. All behold, he ate the pig. Thus proving that he's a zygy piggy zygy piggy zygy piggy. Oink 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 oink.
Number 8.
Commenter. During the Apollo 8 flight, astronaut commander Frank Borman came down with a stomach bug and ended up vomiting and shitting himself at the same time. There was barf and diarrhea floating around the space capsule, and the other astronauts had to put on gas masks to block the stench while they cleaned it up. Person B. I'm in a similar vein, on a space mission, I can't remember which one, before vacuum toilets were invented, a crew member took a shit and didn't bag it up, resulting in a fat log floating about the cabin. On the mission transcript you can see that there was a discussion about who did it, and no one ever owned up.
Number 9.
Commenter. A survivor of the Titanic managed to survive 5 hours in the freezing water only to meet his demise later in life by drowning in a shallow pond. Person B. Ooh, I know a lot about the Titanic. Like the longest lasting survivor in the water lasted around 2 hours. The reason he was there for so long was because he didn't want to mess up his hair, so he stepped into the water slowly as the bow went down, also might be why he survived so long, a dry head. The owner of Macy's department store and his wife were on the ship. He was offered a seat due to his age but refused to go while there were women and children still remaining on the ship. He urged his wife to board, but she refused, saying, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." In the movie they are pictured as the old couple cuddling in bed as the ship sinks. In real life they were last seen on the deck near lifeboat number 8, holding each other. It was one of the first ships with an onboard pool. It featured 2 seawater pools as well as a Turkish bath. While many people know of the grand staircase, many people don't know there was a second, smaller grand staircase topped by a smaller glass dome further back on the ship. Of the 4 smokestacks on the ship, only 3 are real. The 4th one only contains exhaust vents for the kitchens. The designers of the ship thought 4 smokestacks looked grander. The third-class passengers, numbered around 700, only had access to 2 bathrooms. Also, most passengers shared a bathroom, even first class. Only the 2 promenade suites in first class had private bathrooms. While many people know the reason for such a large loss of life is the lack of lifeboats, it's also the case that many lifeboats launched with less than 50% capacity. This is thought to be a combination of many early lifeboats being launched when many people still thought it was a drill, as well as an inexperienced crew attempting to handle a frightened mass of people once it was confirmed that the ship was going under. In the movie The Captain of the Titanic, Captain Edward Smith is shown meeting his doom aboard the ship on the bridge. In real life no one knows how the captain died. Some report him on the bridge, some say he was seen in his cabin, others say he was in the cafe on board. The best story, Emo, is the one that says he swam up to a lifeboat with a child in his arms. After pulling the child on board the lifeboat, the people turned to pull him up only to find him gone, presumably slipping beneath the sea. All that is known for sure is that he went down with the ship that fateful night. He was set to retire after the voyage was finished. Many bodies were recovered in the weeks following the sinking. But due to the weather and decomposition, many people could not be identified. Two of the more popular, I suppose that's the right word, unidentified souls was a young boy around age 11 with bright blonde hair, and a middle-aged man with diamonds studded into the lining of his jacket.
Number 10.
Michael Jackson once had several business associates come to visit him for a meeting. While waiting in his lobby, they sat down near a life-size wax figure of him. After an hour or so of waiting, the statue jumped at them, freaking them out. Michael Jackson had pretended to be a statue of himself for over an hour to scare these guys waiting in his lobby.
Number 11.
Bodies of victims who had died from plague were used as biological weapons during the Middle Ages. During the siege of Kaffa, bodies of plague victims were catapulted over the city walls to infect the inhabitants by the invading Mongol army.
Number 12.
King Umberto I of Italy stopped by a restaurant for dinner where he met the owner. He was stunned because they looked like identical twins. They were both born in the same town on the same day. They married women who had the same names. The restaurant owner opened his restaurant on the same day that Umberto was crowned. Umberto invited him to spend time with him, but he was killed that morning. Umberto was assassinated the same night.
Number 13.
On December 7, 1941, the old destroyer USS Ward, under the command of William Outerbridge, fired America's first shot of World War II when it sank a Japanese midget submarine attempting to sneak into Pearl Harbor. Exactly 3 years later, on December 7, 1944, the Ward was fatally damaged by a kamikaze and had to be abandoned. A nearby destroyer, the USS O'Brien, moved in to rescue survivors and to scuttle the Ward. The man commanding the O'Brien, William Outerbridge.
Number 14.
In the Middle Ages, wealthy people would go to extremes to have a pale complexion. Being tan was associated with working outside, thus being poor. To stay lovely and pale, women would eat clay, endure leeches sucking their blood, wear makeup made of lead/whale blubber. Some of the shit people would do to be considered pretty back then is absolutely insane.
Number 15.
Britain and the United States once went to war over a pig. Lyman Cutler, an American farmer, found the pig eating his potatoes. Cutler was so annoyed that he killed the pig. The Irish pig owner Charles Griffin demanded $100 in compensation. Cutler refused, apparently saying, "You should have kept your pig out of my potatoes," with Griffin replying, "You should have kept your potatoes out of my pig." The argument escalated to the point where 461 Americans with 14 cannons were facing off against 5 British warships mounting 70 guns and carrying 2,140 men. No shots were fired, but a lot of insults were exchanged.
Number 16.
Surgery with 300% mortality rate. While amputating the patient's leg at the hip, Liston accidentally sliced through the fingers of one of his assistants. That would have been bad enough, but it proved disastrous when the patient's stump turned gangrenous. The saw must have been contaminated, because the assistant became ill and infected, too. The procedure was being observed by an elderly doctor in a dress coat with long tails. In the confusion, Liston cut through the man's coat. He wasn't cut, but because blood was spurting around, the old gentleman didn't know that. Feeling the tug, and seeing himself covered in blood, the man collapsed on the floor, had a heart attack, and died. Within a few days, both the patient and the assistant died. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time.